The hushed whispers and cruel stares cut through the dusty morning air of Silverton, Colorado, 1878, as Clara Bennett struggled to balance her market basket while cradling her infant daughter against her chest. The small mining town had never been kind to a woman in her position, but today the judgment felt especially suffocating. "Shame walking in broad daylight," muttered Mrs. Holloway, the butcher's wife, loud enough for Clara to hear as she approached the produce stand. Clara kept her eyes lowered, focusing on the simple task of selecting vegetables while ignoring the burning in her cheeks. At 22, she had already endured more hardship than most twice her age. The gold wedding band she still wore meant nothing to the townsfolk who had decided her story the moment she arrived 6 months ago, heavily pregnant and alone. "That'll be 60 cents, said the vendor coldly, deliberately overcharging her. Clara's hands trembled as she counted out her meager coins. "But yesterday it was 40. Prices change," he snapped, "especially for certain types." She was painfully aware of her daughter's small weight against her chest, the baby beginning to fuss as if sensing her mother's distress. Clara had only enough money for either the vegetables or the milk she needed, not both. Her stomach clenched with familiar hunger as she decided the baby's needs would come first. "I'll just take the milk then," she said quietly. The laughter from a group of women nearby made her flinch. Little Abigail began to cry in earnest now, her wails drawing even more unwanted attention. "Can't even control her bastard," someone whispered loudly. Clara's vision blurred with unshed tears as she struggled to soothe the baby while reaching for her milk. In her haste, her elbow caught the edge of her basket, sending it tumbling to the ground. Potatoes rolled in the dirt as Abigail's cries grew louder, making a mess everywhere, the vendor complained, making no move to help. Clara knelt awkwardly, trying to gather her belongings while keeping the baby secure. A pair of worn leather boots stepped into her view, stopping directly before her. She didn't look up, expecting another tormentor. "Folks around here seem to have forgotten their manners," a deep voice drawled. The man crouched down, gathering her scattered items with strong, sun-tanned hands. When Clara finally raised her eyes, she found herself looking into the steadiest gaze she'd ever encountered. The stranger's eyes were the color of a summer storm, set in a weather-beaten face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Thank you," she whispered, so unused to kindness that the words felt foreign on her tongue. The man stood to his full height, towering over the market stall. "How much for the ladies' groceries?" he asked the vendor. $1.20, the vendor said, the price magically higher than before. Without hesitation, the stranger placed coins on the counter. "Add whatever else the lady needs." Clara stared in disbelief as the stranger turned to her. "Madam, what else were you looking for today?" Finding her voice, Clara managed. "Just some milk and perhaps a bit of flour." The man nodded to the vendor, who reluctantly added the items to her basket. The stranger paid without comment, then lifted the now heavy basket as if it weighed nothing. "Allow me to escort you home, madam," he said, not really a question. The market had fallen silent, all eyes on this unexpected scene. Clara hesitated only a moment before nodding. The baby had quieted, staring curiously at the tall stranger. "I'm Zachariah Taylor," he said as they walked away from the prying eyes. "Most just call me Zach." "Clara Bennett," she replied softly, "and this is Abigail." As they walked through the dusty streets, Clara felt the weight of judgment lifting slightly with each step taken beside this unexpected protector. She led him toward the edge of town, where a small, weathered cabin stood in desperate need of repair. "It's not much," she said apologetically as they approached. "A home is what you make of it," Zach replied simply. Inside, the cabin was meticulously clean despite its poor condition. A small bed occupied one corner, a crude crib beside it. A table with 2 mismatched chairs and a stove completed the sparse furnishings. Zach set the basket on the table. "Been in Silverton long?" 6 months, Clara answered, settling Abigail in her crib. "I arrived just before she was born," Zach nodded, understanding the calculation. "Husband?" Clara stiffened. Dead, fever took him on our journey west. Whether he believed her or not, Zach didn't press. I've got a ranch about 5 miles outside town, nothing fancy, but it's coming along. Could use some help with the house and cooking if you're interested in work. Clara turned to him, suspicion warring with hope. Why would you help us? Zach removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair touched with silver at the temples despite him not looking much past 30. Because 20 years ago, my mother found herself in a situation not unlike yours. Only difference was no one offered her a helping hand. Clara studied him, searching for deception and finding none. What would this arrangement entail? Honest work for fair pay, Zach said. Got a small cabin on the property where you and the little one could stay, private and yours. I eat simple, but regular meals would be welcome. Some cleaning, mending maybe, whatever your skills are. And nothing more expected, Clara asked bluntly. Zach's expression remained unchanged. Nothing more, my word on that. Clara glanced around the cabin that had been both refuge and prison these past months. Winter would be harsh here, and her funds were nearly gone. Abigail deserved better than slow starvation. When would you want me to start? Can pick you up tomorrow morning if that suits. Give you time to gather your things, Clara nodded slowly. Tomorrow then. Zach replaced his hat. Tomorrow, Mrs. Bennett. After he left, Clara sat beside Abigail's crib watching her daughter's peaceful sleep. What do you think, little one? Are we making a terrible mistake, or might this be our chance? The baby sighed in her sleep, tiny fingers curling around her mother's offered finger. Morning came with a soft knock at Clara's door precisely when the town clock struck 8. She had been awake for hours, packing their meager belongings into a single trunk and a carpet bag. Abigail was fed and wrapped snugly against the early autumn chill. Zach stood outside with a wagon, his expression unreadable as he loaded her trunk. Ready. Clara nodded, taking one last look at the cabin that had sheltered them through Abigail's first months of life. Yes, we're ready. The journey to Zach's ranch took them through rolling hills that gradually gave way to a valley nestled against the mountains. Clara watched the landscape change, holding Abigail close as the wagon bounced along the rutted path. It's beautiful, she said honestly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Been working this land for 5 years now, Zach replied, pride evident in his voice. Started with nothing but a claim and determination. As they crested a hill, Clara caught her first glimpse of the ranch. A sturdy 2-story house stood surrounded by several outbuildings, a corral with horses, and cattle grazing in the distance. It was modest compared to some operations, but clearly the result of one man's hard work and vision. You built all this yourself? She asked, impressed despite herself. Had help with the barn raising and some of the heavier work. Rest is mine, Zach said as he guided the wagon toward the house. Got about 60 head of cattle now, 5 good horses, planning to expand next spring if all goes well. They passed a smaller cabin set apart from the main house. That'll be yours, Zach explained. Previous ranch hand lived there before moving on to California. Been empty for months, but it's sound. The cabin was indeed small but sturdy, with a porch facing east to catch the morning sun. Inside, Clara found it basic but clean, with a bed, table, 2 chairs, and a small stove. A wooden cradle had been placed near the bed. Had that in storage, Zach said, noticing her gaze on the cradle. Figured the little one could use it. Clara ran her fingers over the smooth wood, noting the careful craftsmanship. Thank you, this is more than generous. Zach shrugged. Get settled in. Come to the main house when you're ready, and I'll show you around. Left alone with Abigail, Clara unpacked their few possessions, marveling at how quickly their lives had changed. The cabin had 2 small windows that let in ample light, and a rag rug softened the wooden floor. It was the nicest place she had lived since leaving her family's home in Pennsylvania nearly 2 years ago. Later that afternoon, Clara made her way to the main house with Abigail nestled in a sling across her chest. The ranch house was solidly built but sparsely furnished, clearly the domain of a man living alone. The kitchen showed signs of bachelor cooking with minimal equipment and little organization. Not much of a cook, Zach admitted as he showed her around. Been living on beans, bacon, and coffee most days. I can change that, Clara assured him, already making mental notes of what would be needed. Zach showed her the pantry, storeroom, and root cellar, all well stocked despite his simple diet. Don't lack for supplies, just the knowledge to use them properly. The tour concluded in his office where he outlined her duties and pay. The salary he offered was fair, more than she could have earned in town even if someone had been willing to hire her. Sundays are yours entirely, he said. Can take you to church in town if you wish, though I don't attend regular myself. Clara thought of the judgmental faces at the market. I think I'll worship privately for now. Zach nodded, understanding without needing explanation. One more thing. Got a lady coming from town twice a week to help with laundry and heavier cleaning. Mrs. Winters. Good woman, widowed during the war, keeps to herself and her business. Clara appreciated the consideration. The workload would be manageable even with caring for Abigail. As the days turned into weeks, Clara settled into a routine at the Taylor ranch. She rose early to prepare breakfast, tended to Abigail, handled the cooking and lighter household duties, and gradually brought order to Zach's bachelor existence. He was an easy employer, appreciative of her efforts and respectful of her privacy. Zach typically spent his days working with the cattle, repairing fences, or handling the 1,000 tasks required to maintain the ranch. He returned for meals, cleaned up properly before coming to the table, and always had a gentle word or smile for Abigail, who watched him with fascination. Clara noticed how he kept a respectful distance, never entering her cabin uninvited, never making her uncomfortable with unwanted attention. Yet she found herself watching him when he didn't notice, admiring his quiet strength and the gentle way he handled animals. October brought colder weather, and the first dustings of snow on the distant peaks. Clara had been at the ranch for nearly a month when Zach announced he needed to make a trip to town for supplies. Anything particular you need? He asked over breakfast. Clara considered. Some fabric for winter clothes for Abigail. She's growing so quickly. Zach nodded. Write a list. I'll be back before dark. Clara spent the morning baking bread and preparing a stew that could simmer all day. After putting Abigail down for her nap, she noticed dark clouds gathering over the mountains. The weather could change quickly in these parts, and she worried about Zach's return journey. By mid-afternoon, snow had begun to fall, light at first but growing steadier. Clara paced by the window, watching the road anxiously. When she finally spotted the wagon approaching through the thickening snow, relief flooded through her. Zach was hunched against the cold, hat pulled low, reins gripped in gloved hands. Clara hurried out to help unload the supplies, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Should not have lingered in town, Zach muttered as they carried packages inside. Storm came faster than expected. You're home safely. That's what matters, Clara said, then flushed at her choice of words. This wasn't his home, not really. If Zach noticed her discomfort, he didn't comment. Instead, he reached into one of the packages and pulled out a small paper-wrapped bundle. For Abigail, he said, handing it to Clara. Inside, she found a tiny stuffed horse, expertly crafted from soft leather with real horsehair for its mane and tail. Zach, it's beautiful, she said, genuinely touched. She'll love it. And this, he continued, producing another package, is for you. Clara unwrapped it to find a thick wool shawl in deep blue. The quality was far better than anything she could have afforded for herself. I cannot accept this, she protested weakly, even as her fingers caressed the soft fabric. Winter gets cold here, Zach said simply. Need to keep warm. That evening, as the snow continued to fall, Clara served the stew with fresh bread. They ate in comfortable silence until Abigail began to fuss in her basket nearby. May I? Zach asked, gesturing toward the baby. Surprised, Clara nodded. Zach carefully lifted Abigail, cradling her with unexpected skill. The baby quieted immediately, staring up at him with wide eyes. You're good with her, Clara observed, had younger siblings, Zach explained. Ma needed help after Pa died. Clara realized how little she knew about this man who had changed their lives so dramatically. "Where is your family now?" Ma passed 5 years back. Sister married and moved to Oregon. Brother works the railroads, rarely in one place long. He gently bounced Abigail, who had grasped his finger in her tiny hand. "You got family somewhere," Clara stared into her bowl. "Parents disowned me when I married against their wishes. No siblings." "And your husband?" Zach asked carefully. Clara hesitated. The lie she had told in town had become her shield, but sitting here in the warmth of Zach's kitchen, with snow isolating them from the world, the truth pressed against her like a physical weight. "There was no husband," she admitted finally, voice barely above a whisper. "I worked as a teacher's assistant in Pittsburgh. The school's headmaster, he promised marriage." She swallowed hard. "When I told him about the baby, he denied everything, said I was trying to trap him. I was dismissed without references." She couldn't look at Zach, afraid of what she might see in his eyes. "I came west because I had nowhere else to go, invented a dead husband because it seemed more merciful than the truth." The silence stretched between them. Clara finally gathered her courage and looked up. Instead of disgust or judgment, she saw quiet understanding in Zach's face. "Man like that isn't worth your tears," he said at last. "Or your shame. You've raised this little one with love and courage. That's what matters." Clara felt something loosen in her chest, a burden partially lifted by his simple acceptance. "Thank you for not thinking less of me." "Man in glass house shouldn't throw stones," Zach replied cryptically, handing Abigail back to her. "Getting late, storm's not letting up. Best get to your cabin before it gets worse." Wrapped in her new shawl, with Abigail bundled against her chest, Clara made her way through the swirling snow to their cabin. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt seen for who she truly was, rather than judged for her mistakes. The blizzard continued for 3 days, confining them largely to their respective dwellings. Zach made his way through the snow each morning to check on them, bringing firewood and making sure they were warm enough. Clara insisted he stay for coffee and breakfast each time, finding herself looking forward to these brief visits. When the storm finally broke, leaving the world transformed under a blanket of white, Zach appeared at her door with a proposition. "Snow's too deep for you to walk back and forth to the main house several times a day," he said practically. "And keeping 2 places warm is wasteful. Would make sense for you and Abigail to stay in the spare room at the house until the worst of winter passes." Clara hesitated, concerned about appearances and propriety. "Mrs. Winters will still come when weather permits," Zach added, sensing her reluctance. "And I give you my word as a gentleman, your honor will be respected." The practical benefits were undeniable. The main house was better insulated, had a larger stove, and would save her trudging through deep snow multiple times daily with Abigail. "Just until the worst of winter passes," she agreed. That evening, settled into the comfortable spare room with Abigail sleeping peacefully in the cradle Zach had moved for them, Clara felt an unfamiliar sense of security. Through the wall, she could hear Zach moving about in his own room, the quiet sounds of another person sharing the same roof oddly comforting after months of isolation. Winter tightened its grip on the valley as November gave way to December. The ranch settled into a snow-bound routine, with Zach handling essential outdoor chores while Clara transformed the bachelor house into a home. She hung simple curtains, arranged dried flowers in jars, and filled the rooms with the sense of baking and good cooking. In the evenings, they sat by the fire while Abigail played on a blanket at their feet. Zach carved wooden animals for her growing collection, while Clara mended or knitted. Sometimes they talked, sharing pieces of their past or hopes for the future. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, the crackle of the fire and Abigail's happy babbling the only sounds. Clara found herself watching Zach's hands as he worked, strong and capable yet gentle when handling Abigail. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he always made sure she had the more comfortable chair, the way he listened intently when she spoke as if her words mattered. For his part, Zach observed the changes in Clara as winter progressed. The wariness in her eyes gradually gave way to confidence. She laughed more easily, stood straighter, and the shadows of past pain receded. He admired her resilience, her devotion to her daughter, and the quiet dignity with which she had faced adversity. As Christmas approached, Zach rode to town despite the cold, returning with small gifts and treats that weren't part of their regular supplies. Clara secretly worked on presents of her own, a new shirt she had sewn for Zach from fabric he'd purchased earlier, and a knitted scarf to replace his worn one. On Christmas Eve, they decorated a small pine tree Zach had cut from their land. He produced a box of ornaments he hadn't used since his mother's passing. She would have wanted them enjoyed, he said simply when Clara expressed concern about using such personal items. That night, after a special dinner and with Abigail asleep early, exhausted from the excitement, they sat before the fire sharing a rare glass of whiskey. "Never thought I'd have a proper Christmas again," Zach admitted, staring into the flames. "Been lonely times these past years." Clara studied his profile, highlighted by the firelight. "Why did you never marry?" she asked, the whiskey making her bolder than usual. Zach was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. "Was engaged once," he finally said. 8 years back, Emily was her name. Daughter of a rancher over in Wyoming Territory. He took a slow sip of whiskey. Week before the wedding, a group of raiders hit her father's ranch. Emily and her mother were. He shook his head. They didn't survive. "Oh, Zach, I'm so sorry," Clara whispered, horrified at having raised such painful memories. "Took me years to find peace with it," he continued. "Threw myself into building this place, figured I'd live out my days alone." He turned to look directly at her. "Until you and Abigail came along." The intensity in his gaze made Clara's heart beat faster. "We've imposed on your solitude." "No," he said firmly. "You've reminded me what it is to have purpose beyond just surviving. This house hasn't felt like a home until you brought light back into it." Clara found herself unable to look away from him. "And you gave us sanctuary when no one else would." Neither of them seemed aware of moving, but suddenly they were closer, the space between them charged with unspoken emotion. Zach reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Clara," he said softly, "I find myself thinking of you in ways that go beyond our arrangement." Her breath caught. "I have similar thoughts." His hand gently cupped her cheek. "Would it be too forward to kiss you?" In answer, Clara leaned toward him, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers with gentle restraint, the kiss tentative at first, then deepening as she responded. His arms encircled her, strong yet respectful, and Clara felt something bloom in her chest, hope, long dormant, springing back to life. When they finally parted, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that for weeks now," Clara smiled. "Why did you wait so long?" "Needed you to be sure, to know you had choices." His expression grew serious. "Still do, nothing changes unless you want it to." Clara touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "What if I want everything to change?" Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight sparkling off the snow-covered landscape. Clara woke to Abigail's happy babbling and the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Wrapping herself in her robe, she found Zach at the stove, attempting pancakes with determined concentration. "Merry Christmas," he said, looking up with a smile that made her heart skip. "Thought I'd try my hand at breakfast for once." Clara laughed at his slightly lopsided creations. "A valiant effort." Abigail squealed from her high chair, reaching toward Zach. Over the past months, the baby had grown increasingly attached to him, lighting up whenever he entered a room. "Little one approves at least," he chuckled, gently touching Abigail's cheek. They exchanged gifts after breakfast, Zach genuinely touched by the shirt and scarf Clara had made. His gift to her was a silver locket containing a tiny photograph of Abigail that he had somehow arranged to have taken and processed during one of his trips to town. "It's perfect," Clara whispered, fighting tears as she fastened it around her neck. For Abigail, there was a handcrafted rocking horse, scaled perfectly for a child just learning to stand. Clara recognized it as something Zach had been secretly working on in the barn for weeks. As winter slowly released its grip on the land, Clara and Zach's relationship deepened. He began courting her properly, respecting her need to move carefully given her past experience. They shared tender kisses and long conversations, learning each other's hearts as January gave way to February. On Valentine's Day, Zach arranged for Mrs. Winters to watch Abigail while he took Clara on a sleigh ride across the snow-covered ranch. Bundled in blankets, they explored parts of the property Clara hadn't yet seen, including a frozen waterfall that would be spectacular come spring thaw. "Been thinking about the future," Zach said as they paused to admire the view. "About what I want for this land, for myself." Clara watched him, noting the nervous energy he rarely displayed. "And what have you concluded?" "That I want to build something lasting, something to pass on." He turned to face her fully. "Clara, I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything. I love you. I love Abigail as if she were my own. I want us to be a family, properly and legally." Clara's eyes widened as he produced a small ring from his pocket. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Simple like she was, but strong too." He held it out to her. "Clara Bennett, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Clara looked at the man before her, honest, hardworking, gentle despite his strength, and felt absolute certainty. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Zachariah Taylor, I will marry you." The ring fit perfectly, as if meant for her all along. Zach's kiss was filled with promise and joy, warming her despite the winter chill. Spring arrived with new beginnings. The snow melted, revealing tender green shoots pushing through the earth. Cattle grazed on fresh grass, and new calves wobbled alongside their mothers. Abigail took her first steps, toddling determinedly from Clara to Zach, who swung her high with proud laughter. They were married in April by the traveling minister who visited the outlying ranches quarterly. The ceremony took place on their own land, beside the stream now flowing freely with snowmelt. Mrs. Winters attended, along with a few neighboring ranchers who had become friendly since learning of their engagement. Clara wore a new dress of pale blue, with wildflowers in her hair. Zach stood tall in his best suit, freshly trimmed beard framing his smile. Abigail, now 14 months old, served as their only attendant, clutching a small posy of spring blossoms as Clara held her on her hip. "I take you, Clara, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Zach vowed, his voice steady and true. "I promise to love and cherish you and Abigail, to protect and provide for you both, to be faithful and true all the days of my life." Clara's voice trembled slightly with emotion as she responded. "I take you, Zachariah, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love and honor you, to stand beside you through whatever life brings, to build our family and our future together, as long as we both shall live." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zach kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to Clara's eyes. Abigail patted their faces happily, bringing laughter from the small gathering. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Mrs. Winters had helped prepare a feast, and one of the neighboring ranchers brought his fiddle for dancing. As afternoon faded into evening, Clara found herself watching her new husband spinning Abigail in gentle circles, the child's delighted giggles carrying across the yard. "He's good with her," Mrs. Winters observed, following Clara's gaze. "Not many men would take on another man's child so completely." "She's his now," Clara said softly, "in every way that matters. And you, my dear," the older woman asked kindly, "have you found what you were looking for?" Clara touched the simple gold band now accompanying her engagement ring. "I found what I didn't dare hope for," she answered truthfully. "A second chance, a good man, a real home." Later that night, after their guests had departed and Abigail slept peacefully in her room, Clara stood with Zach on the porch of what was now truly their home. His arms encircled her from behind as they gazed at stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. "Happy, Mrs. Taylor." He murmured against her hair. Clara leaned back into his embrace, feeling complete in a way she had never experienced. "Perfectly happy, Mr. Taylor." "Good," he said, turning her gently to face him, "because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." As he kissed her under the vast Colorado sky, Clara knew they had both found redemption in each other's arms. From cruel whispers at a market to this moment of perfect belonging, their journey had transformed them both. Whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, husband, wife, and the daughter they both cherished, a family forged from compassion and bound by love. 1 year later, Clara stood on the same porch, watching Zach teach Abigail to ride her first pony, a gentle old mare that plodded patiently around the yard. The little girl's laughter floated on the spring breeze as Zach walked alongside, one hand steadying her, the other holding the lead rope. Clara rested her hands on her rounded belly, feeling the strong kicks of the new life growing within. Their son would be born by summer's end, completing the family they had created from unlikely beginnings. "Look, Mama," Abigail called, waving excitedly. "I riding. I see you, sweetheart." Clara called back, smiling at her daughter's joy and the proud expression on her husband's face. Who could have imagined, that day in the market when whispers cut like knives, that those cruel moments would lead her here? To this land, this man, this life filled with purpose and love. Clara Taylor watched her family, hand resting protectively over her unborn child, and knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the hardest journeys led to the most beautiful destinations.